Okay, when you're reducing or simplifying fractions, now we've already talked about changing mixed numbers into improper fractions and changing improper fractions back into mixed numbers, but reducing and simplifying fractions is just something that goes hand in hand with all this stuff. It's one of those things you have to do all the time, it's just kind of common knowledge, but just remember, anytime you see reducing or simplifying, they mean the same thing. Okay, so let me show you what I mean by this. So like if I had the fraction 14 over 16. So when we look at this, it might be one of those skills you have to develop over time, but we look right here, 14 over 16, this isn't reduced all the way. Okay, and what I mean by reduced all the way is there's still numbers that can divide into this. So when you look at 14 and 16, they're both even numbers, so 2 automatically goes into both of them. So when we're reducing, we want to find the highest number that goes into both of these. So you think, okay, what goes into 14? Well, let's see. Let me write it up here. Let's see. 1 goes into 14, 2, 7, and 14 itself. So then we go down to 16. We think, okay, what goes into 16? 1, 2, what else goes in? 4, 8, and 16. So when we're trying to reduce, we're trying to find the highest number that goes into both of these. Well, with this first example, you can kind of see, well, there's only 2 numbers that go in, or they only have 1 that goes into both of them. In that case, it's 2. Okay, so when we actually reduce these, let's see, we got 14 sixteenths. So if I divide each of these by 2, that's what reduction does. Division sign a little better. Divided by 2. So 14 divided by 2 is 7. And 16 divided by 2 is 8. Okay, now I look at this, 7/8, I know this is reduced all the way because the only thing that will go into 7 is 1 and 7. Okay, and I know neither of those will divide evenly into 8, so I know this is reduced all the way. Okay, and when you're reducing fractions, as the numbers get bigger, it gets a little bit more challenging. So it just kind of depends what they gave you. Like if they gave you something like 20, let's do 20 35ths. Let's do something ridiculous. Okay, so 20 and 35, I'm thinking, okay, what goes into both these? Well, 20 is an even number, 35 is an odd number, so 2 won't go into them. 2 only goes into even numbers. But we look at this ends in 0 and this ends in 5. So, what goes into numbers that end in 0 and 5? Well, 5. So if I take 20 and I divide it by 5, and 35 divided by 5, 20 divided by 5 is 4, and 35 divided by 5 is 7. Okay, now we get 4/7, which we know is reduced all the way. Because again, we got a 7 on the bottom. Now that won't be a trend, it's just kind of a coincidence with the numbers I picked. But we look right here, the only things that go into 7 are 1 and 7, and I know neither of those will go into 4. So this is the simplified version of this problem. Sorry, my drawing's a little bad there. But the important thing to realize here is that 14 sixteenths and 7/8 are the same thing, just as, let me write it over here, just as 20 35ths and 4/7 are the same thing. Okay, so what you got to realize is, again, we're not changing the value of these fractions, we're just reducing the amounts to have an easier fraction to deal with, because if you have the choice of working with 14 sixteenths or 7/8, I'm going to pick 7/8 because 7/8 is easier to work with. Now with these, people always ask me, Mr. Michaels, how do you what's the secret to being good at reducing fractions? I always kind of give the simple answer. If you know your times tables, these are pretty manageable to do. If you don't know your times tables, you might have to struggle. You might, have to fish around a little bit for the answer. Okay, let me get some more space here. So, as the numbers get bigger, it just gets more challenging. Like if you had something ridiculous like, let me throw something ridiculous out there, just for argument's sake. Like let's say we had 32 over, let's say like 96. Okay, so now when you got a fraction like this, you might not be able to see what goes into both of them right off the bat. If you're really good at multiplication, you might see it, but some people have trouble. So when you look at this, like 32 and 96, one thing you can always do is find just something that goes into both of them and reduce it just one time. So like with 32 and 96, I know 2 goes into both these because they are both even numbers. So if I divide this by 2, let's see, divide by 2, see what that gives me. That'll give me 16 over 96 divided by 2. Let's see, what's that, 48? Okay, so now we look at this one, 16 over 48, they're both even numbers, so again, that's not reduced, but maybe you can see a pattern or a bigger number that goes into both of these. So like with 16 and 48, I know 8 goes into both of these, so divide this by 8, divide this by 8, so that'll knock it down to what, 2 over 6, but again, still not done, because 2 over 6, these can both be reduced by 2. So that gives me 1/3. Okay, some people might have been able to see that right off the bat. They might say, hey, 32 goes into both these, so I can go straight to the 1/3. Like I tell everyone, it's not about how you get there, it's the fact that you get there. And you realize that when you get to 1/3, that's reduced all the way. Okay, and again, just to kind of reiterate what we did with the last 3 videos, if you can go straight from here, straight from this to this, more power to you, awesome. If you have to go from here to here, then to here, that's completely fine, okay? The important thing, like I said, is just realizing that, hey, this needs to be reduced, and this is the final reduced form. However many steps it takes you, whether it takes 3 steps, 4 steps, whatever, okay? Just as long as you realize it's reduced all the way, okay? And that's how you reduce fractions, okay? And it's one of those things, you'll deal with, you'll come up frequently enough that you have to be pretty proficient in it, and like with a bunch of this redundant stuff, it repeats itself, so you'll eventually get answers memorized.